Welcome to another amazing edition to Building Out Loud podcast. I am your host, MacTheVC, aka Matt Conwell, founder and managing partner of Rare Breed Ventures, a pre-seed to seed venture fund based here in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm joined by my co-host, lawyer Liam, aka Liam Gill. Shout out to the folks, Liam.
Yeah, how you doing? This is the second of our back-to-backs. For those who remember what would have been last week, what I said. I realize, Mac, you're pitching Rare Breed pretty hard at the beginning of these. Are you looking for companies to reach out to you?
I'm always looking for companies to reach out to me. I'm also looking for LPs to reach out to me. We are a 506c fund who is currently raising a fund too. If you want to learn more, let me know. But you know what, Liam? Tell everybody about what you be working on.
Yeah, so for those founders out there, I've got a newsletter and a website which helps with lowering your legal costs. So the newsletter keeps you up to date with new laws, acts, judgments, anything that might help you in the privacy, tech, employment sort of areas. And the website's got 60 plus free legal templates. You just come on, they're all in Google Docs. You can download them. And for people hearing this in a few months, that probably will have changed into some far more user-friendly, nice SaaS product. So either way, check out Law for Startups, and I'm sure you'll find something that will help your startup.
All right. Law for Startups. Y'all need to check it out, folks. And so today we're going to be hitting some very topical, some things that are happening in the news, new legislation, new things that are top of mind, new things that have to affect money and money that may be coming to entrepreneurs like you. So Liam, this is going to be a very lawyer Liam heavy kind of a podcast. So heads up, folks. He's the smarter one of the two. So Liam, what's going on? What's happening in the news? Where's this money coming from? Apparently, Uncle Joe Biden is out here throwing dollars. He's being like, Oprah, you get a check, you get a check, you get a discount, you get a loophole. What's poppin'?
Yeah. So there's two specific things that have come out in the past week. So for those who obviously are listening when this comes out, it's August 27th today. So sort of within the last 10 days or so. And that would be the Inflation Reduction Act, which will increase inflation, and the student loan forgiveness. So both of them are major pieces of legislation, and both were major promises from Biden when he ran. And they will both have an impact, I'm assuming, on most founders, and specifically the Inflation Reduction Act will have an impact on markets for sure. There's billions of dollars. It's the biggest climate change act ever passed in U.S. history. It will have so much money handed out to major companies working on innovative technologies, batteries, a whole bunch of different industries. And that's going to impact funding for sure. It's going to impact the ability for founders working in those areas to supplement potential private funding with grants and public money. And then when we look at the loan forgiveness, so that's student loan forgiveness, it's $10,000 is the standard amount that they're forgiving for anyone who makes under $125,000 in their household. And again, that's going to impact, I believe, a lot of founders. I think there's a good amount of founders who have student loans, or potential founders who are stuck in a job because they need to pay off their student loans. And those people might now have a chance to start their own company, might have alleviated some financial pressure. And we might see some new founders in the market. So those are the two things I wanted to touch on specifically.
Take it away. Which one you want to start with?
Well, I think let's start with student loans, because I think student loans is the
student
most.
Loans suck, by the way, but if you got to take them out to go to school, do what you got to do. Wasn't a thing for me. That's why I dropped out of college. So sorry y'all, I ain't really have that. But for those of y'all out there, man, student loans are rough.
Yeah, well, yeah. So the student loan forgiveness is very controversial for a multitude of reasons. I think, Mac, you're probably a great person to talk about, given your background with them, and just the type of people that you see, both founders, people within your community. Also I'm in Canada. I don't grow up in the US. For us, if you're Canadian, you go to Canadian school, it's very cheap. I think it's like $6,000 a year, $7,000 a year. You get student loans, but they're not predatory in any way. They're like relatively low. The interest doesn't even accumulate while you're like at school. It's very very friendly to people. If we're talking about my personal opinions, I am very much of the opinion that university should be free. If you want to take that a step further, I think that like university should be free, and then people should have to work back what would have been the cost of that education. So I personally believe in some sort of government service, whether that's like working as a doctor, working for free. If you're a lawyer, like pro bono in courts, I think that every profession in some way, engineers can contribute to the government. I think that like that's the system I personally believe in. Is if you want to go to university, you want to pay for it, good for you. If you want to go to university, you want the government to pay for you, then you should have 3-4 years when you graduate where you're working for the government to pay back whatever education that you've got. Mac, you wanted to jump in?
So let's just talk about like how folks are impacted by their student loan debt, right? I have friends and family members who have upwards of $100,000 plus in student loan debt to get their 4-year undergrad degree. I know people who have as high as $150,000 and $200,000. Mainly because, like, if you go to a school here in the United States that's out of state, so not in the state that you live in, you end up having to pay more. Or if you go to a school that's private, not a state school, you end up paying more just to get the same 4-year degree that everybody else gets. And those student loans get to be so high that your minimum monthly payment is as much as a rent or a mortgage. So imagine this: you're in your early 20s, 23, 24, 22, just out of college, got your first job, making okay money, making 60, 65,000 a year, okay money, good start for you. Because of your student loan debt, you do not make enough money to actually afford an apartment, let alone try to save money, try to get a house, try to get any kind of upward mobility. And then if you have student loan debt that is that high, the minimum payments do not cover enough to actually cover all your interest. So your student loans are actually just growing over time until you can pay more than the minimum. So you got to wait till you're several years into your career making more money so you can get to the point where you actually make enough where you might be able to live on your own and have to do all these other things. This is why a lot of students, when they graduate college, end up going back home and living with their parents. They can't afford it, right? Or you got to move into an apartment with 3 or 4 other roommates, almost like you in college again, just so you can have a place to stay. Like that is the reality of it. Now, don't let you be an early parent, right? Now, between paying your student loans and paying for daycare, you don't have money for anything else. You might not even have money for food or gas in your car, right? So that's tough. And then on the flip side, there are people who've had student loans that have been cost upwards of that same amount who have found the way to pay it off. They've worked hard. They've done everything right. They paid off their student loans, and they don't get to take advantage of that forgiveness. And I get that. That's painful. But we got to look beyond just ourselves and being selfish and seeing that there are other people who are hurting from these types of things, especially if you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a really interesting policy, student loan forgiveness as a whole, because it's far more complex than people give it credit for. And I think I tweeted that like realistically what the policy is it's just Biden buying votes. Like it's $10,000 a vote, and that's all he's doing. And I know that's an oversimplification, and I hate Twitter for the fact that you tend to have to oversimplify shit. But it is a ridiculously complex policy because, as Max said, you've got people who went to university and then took out loans, then did everything right. They worked their asses off. They saved money. They lowered their costs. They lived with their parents, whatever the hell it took, and they paid back their loans. And now those people could have been living a much better life and gotten away with it because of the student loan forgiveness. And they're going to have to live with the fact that the government excused other people for not making the same decisions they did, and they all ended up in the same place. That's hard. There was a really viral video, I think, the day that it was announced, which was a father talking to Elizabeth Warren, and he was complaining about the policy because he said his boss, I believe, made 15 to 20,000 a year more than him, bought a new car every few years, went on family vacations every year, and that his boss's daughter had student loans which were now being forgiven. And this guy had driven the same car for 15 years, never went on a vacation, made less money than his boss, but saved up every year and paid for his daughter's entire education. And she had no loans. And he was being punished for making the right decisions, while his boss, who spent all that money on new cars and vacations, was now getting $10,000 from the government. And that's the reality of it. Is it's a very complex situation, because you do have a lot of people who grew up in less advantaged households, and college was their only way out. Like going to university was their only way to socially progress and economically progress and to move forward. And they took out massive loans and didn't see that economic progression, because university isn't what it was in like the 70s and 80s. It's not that golden ticket to the middle class. Like we all know that by now. But a lot of people throughout the late 90s, like 2000s, still believe that. And their parents still believe it because their parents had seen it. And they took out these massive loans that they're never, ever going to be able to repay. And all they do is every year they struggle to pay and to live. They don't cover their principal, as like Mac was saying, the interest keeps going up, and they're in perpetual debt, and it's never going away. And you need something like this to help those people. But then again, it punishes the people who made the right decisions. And worse than that, it's in a lot of ways a regressive policy, because it helps the lower middle class or the middle class while hurting the poorest people in society, like those who didn't go to university and make less money because of it, those who never had the opportunity to go to university, people who can barely afford a house or can't do anything. Like those people who are at the lowest end of society, they get nothing. And taxpayer money, which could be going towards helping them, potentially get above the poverty line, or potentially, just get the basic resources to live, is now going towards people who are in a far better position than them. In most cases, they might be, financially not in a great place, but at least they've got a home, they've got food, they've got things. And one of the most interesting stats, I think, is that the bill applies to households who are making under 125,000, and only 19% of those have student loans. So you've still got 80% of households in that range, which Biden deemed to be relatively low income, who are not getting any support from this bill at all. And you're going to have, I assume if you looked at the data and you kept going down, you looked at, households under 50,000 income, you're probably down to like 2-3%, I'd assume, of houses in that range who actually have college degrees. Like at that point, you're helping nobody. So I think it's a very complex issue and a very complex problem. And the policy itself was never going to help everyone. And it was never going to make everyone happy, because it's a very specific group of somewhat privileged, but also in many ways deceived people who aren't at the lowest end of society, aren't at the highest end of society, somewhere in the middle, trying to move up, who are stuck because of student loans. And he's helping that group instead of helping, potentially people below them, or helping people at their level who've also made the right decisions. So it is very complex. Is there anything else you wanted to sort of throw in there, Mac?
I'll just speak a little bit to the other side of that one. Yeah, it's complex, because on the other side, you have folks who did go to university, thought it was going to be a pathway to, increasing their economic potential, to getting to the middle class, who are working hard and just struggling to pay it off. And the fact that they're unable to pay down their student loan debt has affected their ability to grow economically. And from a U.S. perspective, the ability for those individuals to no longer have to pay on those student loan debts, or pay less principal, means they have more money to put into the economy. It means there's more money for them to buy housing, more money for them to get business loans, more money for them to start businesses, more money for them to just buy food and clothes for their children, right? And in times of economic downturns, this is a way to give folks some economic freedom. It's a way to infuse capital into the markets and hopefully help stabilize the markets. Like there's a lot of good that can come from it. And there's, on the flip side, a lot of criticism. It's all complicated, but we're all here to support each other. So I'm all here for it. So with that, what's topic number 2, Liam?
Before we jump into topic number 2, I want to jump into the part of topic number 1 I'm actually excited about, which is I strongly believe that there is a whole class of people who are college educated, ambitious, smart, and a lot of them I think will be people of color and minorities who parents were immigrants or who were stuck in a lower socioeconomic class, who went to university, were hoping that going to university would be the step into the middle class, and then got stuck in student loans. And because of that, they never got to take that step. And I think that this $10,000 is going to create an entire new class of entrepreneurs, because these are people who are stuck working their 9 to 5 so they can pay off their loans and pay off their mortgages and pay off their bills, who are now going to be free of one of their major bills. And I think that when they get that money, when they're able to actually rid themselves of the student loans or at least lower the burden of it, a lot of them will take the jump to start their own companies. A lot of them will take the jump to move to different cities. I think a lot of them will do what they thought they were going to do when they were 17, what they thought they were going to do when they were 18. Like, I think a lot of people talk about how as you grow older, you get more responsibilities, your sort of dreams go by the wayside. And I think for a whole group of people, this is a second chance. And I think a lot of those people are minorities and, sort of second generation immigrants. And I think that's really, really exciting, because those are the type of people who historically provide the biggest innovation. Like if you want to look at, the current CEOs of like most of the major tech companies like Microsoft, Google, they're all like first or second generation immigrants. If you want to look at like a lot of the coolest ideas coming out through like Kickstarter, like early stage companies, like a lot of them are from minorities and immigrants. Like these are like a group of people who see the world in a different way, who move to America and see problems in a different way, and who have solutions that are very unique. And to finally have a whole group of them freed from what like pretty much amounts to like some sort of financial slavery is insane. Like they're going to finally get the chance to do what they want, to do what they love. And I'm just very excited for what's going to come from that. I do think if you look in like 3 to 10 years from now, I do really see a surge in entrepreneurship within those groups. And I think a lot of it will be tied back to this specific policy.
All amazing points. And yes, Liam, you're right. That is the most exciting piece, especially for those underrepresented founders out there who are now going to have some more freedom and opportunity to take that plunge. Great points. All right, so now topic number 2, because I'm always jumping ahead. Liam's trying to
yeah. I could talk for ages on everything. It's a good thing we got Mac here to move us forward. So the second one I want to talk about, probably be a much shorter conversation, is the Inflation Reduction Act. So first of all, love the branding, but it's a fiscal spending bill. It puts money into the economy, hence will increase inflation. So don't get fooled by the name, anybody. Although we got to give credit to the White House or the Democratic marketing team for coming up with a name that is going to be catchy and play well during a time when inflation is at like 8+%. So it's really a bill that puts into place a lot of aspects of like the Green New Deal, minus the social parts of it. So it's like very much the climate focused parts of it. So there's funding for battery tech produced within the US. There's funding for EVs. There's funding for solar, wind, I believe nuclear as well. It essentially funds everything you could think of, carbon recapture, like everything that would be impacted when it comes to green technologies. And the reason we bring that up, and the reason I think it's so important to talk about, is because every time the government has passed these massive green bills, it has led to a surge in entrepreneurship, because in the past, we haven't had the private funding for these technologies. I think today we do. I think today we're at a point where VCs know this is the future, and VCs will put money into this. I think you can say the same about private equity, and you obviously got like ECG funds. Like it's like a really big thing to invest in green tech, but this is a whole new level. This is like billions of dollars specifically for these industries, and it allows a VC to make a bet that there's a chance that you start a company and it exits and they 10x. There's also a chance that you start the company, it just has some cool tech, and the government gives you like $1 billion or gives you a few million, or like that they receive their return or the company receives a boost in a completely different way. Like it changes the entire risk reward profile for investors working in this space and for founders working in this space. And I think that's very interesting that at a time when these technologies are starting to become more commonplace, there's an array of funding now for companies to scale them and companies to approach them in an innovative way. And the proof on my end that this is really going to happen and that this policy is actually going to work is that 3 days after the Inflation Reduction Act was announced, Canada announced that they were also going to provide subsidies to, I think it was Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen, if they bought their lithium-ion batteries and did their battery research in Canada. So like you can already see foreign countries are worried about the amount of money going into these industries in the US and how successful companies in the US will probably be because of it. So I think it's a very important thing if you're a founder who works parallel to these industries, one who may service these industries, one who might have an idea in these industries, to really take stock of what is in this bill, what you can benefit from, and how to go about it. Because I think it's a very, very unique opportunity that's going to last a few years for you to get a significant amount of funding and to participate in an industry that's going to grow tremendously.
I will say also add to that, one of the biggest things that's going to come out of this because of these companies getting these subsidies is going to be a lot of money going to R&D, right? And so how do folks do R&D? They spend a lot of money internally, and then they do a lot of merger and acquisition deals. So for founders and startups, Liam point, if you are in these industries or tangentially in these industries, understand your strategic partners are about to get a lot more capital to put towards companies like yours. Now is the time to start building your partnerships and start meeting these folks and start getting ingrained with your potential strategic partners, because all the money's not going to come all at once. It's not like tomorrow we're going to look up and it's all there. But now's the time to start building those relationships, right? Now's the time to start working together. Little tidbit for all you founders out there, want to understand how to get acquired? Start working with a strategic partner in early stages of your company, right? It takes time to build these relationships, right? But as you do, you get to build up a track record of working with them. They get to see how you work. They get to see the inner workings. They get to see how your company grows. It makes the conversation a whole lot easier for acquisition in the future. So being able to get a deal with a Ford, a Chevy, a Tesla, a battery maker, what have you, now can pay dividends in the future. Just a little thing to do. And I know for early stage companies, a lot of people tell you stay away from that. Don't put a whole lot of time into it, but put some time into it. Start building those relationships. Those relationships become really powerful.
Yeah, I think especially in this space, you'll see a lot of companies like Ford or GM. The approach they tend to take is investing small amounts at sort of late seed, Series A, Series B type stages. And they'll take like a 10% or a 15% or a 20%, and they'll just sit on it. They'll sit there to do exactly what Max said, to like get familiar with the company, to understand the company. And once you get to a point where you are potentially ready to go to market, or you're, building something that they need internally, or their grants, so like EV grants, for example, are tied to, you need to source your batteries, or you need to be producing batteries in the US. Like if they're producing them overseas, but acquiring your company gets them over the quota for the US, like there's strategic reasons why they want to be involved with these companies. And I've seen it working a lot with like different in the automotive industry here with different associations that companies are very, very interested right now in what startups are doing. So there was one company that we used to do monthly reports for, and all they did was they would say manufacturing, like who in the US is coming up with innovative manufacturing methods that could impact our business moving forward. And they would want companies that were pre-series B, and you just have to list 15 to 20 companies and how it might impact like manufacturing in their industry. Or they would be like autonomous vehicles or AI, like list 15 to 20 companies. And like that's not something that was happening 5, 6, 7 years ago. Like 5, 6, 7 years ago, the major players in the market were doing what they thought was best, and they were going about it in the ways that they felt fit with what they did historically. They might be investing in big names like a Rivian or a Nikola or something, but like those investments came at later stages. Those investments were big money. Now they're very interested in like seed stage, Series A companies because they know that they're going to need to spend money that's coming in, whether that's through the government or through other grants and partnerships. They're going to need to spend it. And it's a lot easier to spend, $20 million or $10 million or even $5 million acquiring your business, which is already has a team in place, has an office, and is researching X technology that they're super interested in, than it is for them to go out and hire 50 people and to interview 50 people and to put together a team and to find a team leader and to like do all of this. Like it's going to take more time, it's going to take more energy. And when they, we talked about it last episode about like Andreessen Horowitz needing money in, money out. Like some of these companies are going to find themselves in that situation where they need to take the grants, spend the grants to get more grants. Like if they don't spend it, they're not getting any more. And for them, they'd rather spend more money on acquiring a whole bunch of startups and hope that one of them works out than to spend the money slowly, spend less of it, and do everything in-house. Like there's a very big change. At least I've seen it in like the automotive industry, but I assume it's in a lot of other industries across sort of traditional markets where there's going to be a lot more acquisitions. They're going to be at a lot earlier stage, and they're sort of just going to start building in-house teams full of startups, and they're fine if it fails. Like they just want to see what works and what doesn't, and to integrate it when it does. And this bill is going to allow them to do that with relatively no risk, because all that money that they're going to be deploying will be government money, and for them, it's just a chance to hit it big. It's exactly the strategy VCs have. They're going to acquire 10 companies and hope one works, and they know that if that one works, they're going to see a 10x return, and it's going to make up for everything. So I think it's a very interesting bill with the amount of money being given out, the industries it's been given to, and the potential for how that might change exits for companies, the potential for how that might change funding for companies. And I think that is really something that if you're working in these industries or tangential to these industries, you need to be aware of, is that there hasn't been a bill with this much money in a very long time dedicated to very specific industries. So it's going to impact those industries in ways we haven't seen before. And it's important to understand that and to adapt your strategy to fit that. And as Max said, we're not saying stop going for VC, stop building your company, focus on like making a deal with Ford. Like that's not what we're saying. We're saying it might be in your interests, and every company is different. Every one of you guys is going to need to take your own time to figure this out. But it might be in your interest to spend a few hours a week reaching out to big companies and just saying, hey, this is what we're working on. This is how we think it might impact your business. We'd love to hear your opinion on it, or we'd love to try it, do a test trial with you. We'd love to have a partnership with you. We're raising around, wondering if you might be interested in investing in this, like, building those relationships, seeing where they go, so that down the road, when these companies do have this money, which I think is distributed over the next 10 years, they do have the chance in 4 or 5 years from now to actually spend that on acquiring you, and they're familiar with your business and they're happy to do that.
And you know what? That means our next episode, me and Liam are going to talk about business development strategies of how do you get in front of one of these big businesses. Like, yes, we're saying you should build these relationships, but how do you do that? How do you go about it? How do you make it happen? How do you just cold email somebody at Ford and be like, hey, we should work together? I think that makes for a great topic. So maybe y'all should check out next week. where we're going to talk about some business development strategies to work with big businesses. But with that concludes this amazing episode of Building Out Loud podcast. Before I cut it off, Liam, you got any last words for the folks?
No, I think I've already spoken far more than anyone wanted me to.
Don't say that, man. We all love you, Lawyer Liam. Make sure you check me out, MacTheVC, at Mac Conwell on Twitter. Make sure you check out my man at Lawyer Liam on Twitter. Make sure you check out Law for Startups, an amazing tool. It's not legal advice, but it's a bunch of tools you can use for my man, Lawyer Liam. And please make sure you subscribe and review, rate us. If you give us a 5-star rating with a comment or with a question, we may end up putting on the podcast. We probably will put it on the podcast. Make sure you play around with the algorithm. So subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe. Tell everybody that we are the most amazing thing out there. Feel free to email us at buildingoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. Send us your notes, send us your criticism, tell us what we did well, tell us what we can do different, give us some topics, whatever. We are here for you. My man, Lawyer Liam, make sure that we get to all of those, and see y'all next week. Peace out, y'all.